Swinson.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Obviously the topic of supermarkets is a huge one, and I'm sure there will be many issues covered in what will be a wide-ranging debate. I intend to focus my remarks on the issue of packaging, which is an issue I've been campaigning on for quite some time. Early Day Motion 188 stands in my name. I brought a comprehensive policy on reducing excessive packaging to the Liberal Democrat conference, which was passed, and indeed brought forward a 10-minute rule bill on this issue in the last parliamentary session. Indeed, to follow up on that bill, I was due to meet with the Minister today and discuss it further, and obviously that has been delayed due to this debate. But nonetheless, it is welcome to be able to have a discussion about some of those issues here, and then in a few weeks' time to go into more detail. I have to say I very much welcomed many of the Minister's comments, and at some points I wondered whether she was just plagiarising the speech I made last October in my 10-minute rule bill. Although I have to say I can't really complain about that, because it's exactly what I invited her to do, was to take on board the ideas that I was proposing. I was pleased to hear those words, although I do have some questions about whether or not the actions are matching the words, which I'll come to. Obviously, in just under 5 minutes, I can't cover everything, but I'd just like to touch on a few other points before packaging. With the huge power that supermarkets have in our society, I do believe that they have huge responsibility. And whether that's on the fair trade movement, or their impact on the environment through how their staff travel to work, or the recycling that they do, or indeed the energy use that they have, they need to take that responsibility seriously. We've just heard about the contracts for suppliers, which I think is obviously an important issue for supermarkets. And indeed another one that I would add to the list is actually involvement in the community. Very often supermarkets are involved in a community, but don't necessarily take the same interest that the other more local retailers will, whether that's with local festivals or initiatives, or indeed I was surprised to hear that a group of traders in Mulgai, in my constituency, are interested in setting up a business improvement district, which I think sounds like an excellent idea, but they'd heard that Tesco, as a rule, generally don't like to get involved with that, which to me seems to be very sad as a state of affairs indeed. And surely we should be encouraging all retailers to be involved in the communities in which they operate. I do welcome the comments about the planning guidance, because I think it is important that it's not just the competition between the supermarkets that we consider, but also actually the competition with smaller shops. And local authorities need to have the power to ensure diversity of provision. Turning to packaging, and first of all the court-hold commitments. I'm afraid I don't quite share the optimism of the Minister, or indeed the front bench spokesperson for the Conservatives, when they seem to be saying that this was all on target and working very well. I think voluntary agreements are preferable to regulation where they can be proven to work. But I've asked a range of parliamentary questions about the court-hold commitments, and it still seems to be very unclear where the benchmark is or how it will be actually measured. One answer I had said that each court-hold signatory declares their total packaging use each year, but another answer said information on the annual total packaging use of each of the signatories is not routinely collected. So it seems there's some confusion about the court-hold commitments, which I hope we can get to the bottom of, particularly because packaging growth is supposed to be halted this year. So we ought to know where we're at. Who's monitoring it? What is going to happen if they don't meet the targets? Is it going to be naming and shaming? Is that going to be the effective sanction? And will the government consider legally binding targets if the voluntary approach does not work? Turning to the essential requirements regulations on packaging, which is another bugbear of mine, these basically do not work because they allow any producer to have as much packaging as they like, as long as they can prove that it's what is acceptable to the consumer, and that basically if they will sell more products, then it's all right. Now, any marketer, and I declared an interest as a marketing manager before I was elected to this House, will know that you have more space on the supermarket shelf, you're more likely to sell more products. So in fact, the incentive is to increase packaging, and there isn't an effective way to enforce it. I did raise this. I'll certainly give way.
She's absolutely right in what she's just said, and as she knows, I used to work in marketing for a supermarket myself before entering Parliament. Would she therefore not agree that the onus is on the customer to shun products with lots of packaging and buy the ones with minimal packaging? That way, supermarkets and food manufacturers would actually reduce the amount of packaging they would find. We don't need government regulation, it's all in the hands of the consumer.
Well, You can argue for enlightened consumerism, and I think that we should encourage our constituents and ourselves to do that. But in fact, what I would like to see is a level playing field for producers, so that rather than enlightened companies that are taking their environmental responsibilities seriously being effectively penalised by having less space and prominence and therefore fewer sales, if everybody's on the same playing field and are having to sign up to the same regulations, then that actually removes the problem in a different way, and it's still a perfectly acceptable solution from a market point of view. I did question the Secretary of State for the Environment at a select committee session about these regulations in December, and he mentioned that the DG Environment within Europe was looking again at the issue and said that they were undertaking a study. But I've not got very far in finding out where he is with that. I wrote to the DG Environment in January and haven't received a response, and indeed wrote to the Secretary of State in March to see whether he might be able to assist in soliciting such a response. I understand now this was transferred to DBER, and there is a response sitting on the Minister's desk in that department. So I wonder if the Minister here today would be able to assist in getting those answers and actually find out whether the regulations will be reviewed. Briefly on trading standards, I conducted a survey of 200 trading standards offices last year, and it just shows there's been very few prosecutions on the packaging regulations because they're not effective, and indeed the public awareness is quite low. So I hope the government might consider raising public awareness that trading standards can deal with this issue, and that is one way of the public taking it forward. But indeed, while it remains the case that packaging, policing excess packaging is a non-priority for trading standards, we can't necessarily expect wonderful results.
And give way.
I certainly will.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Would my honourable friend not also agree that, in fact, the supermarkets themselves, in their trading with their suppliers, actually insist on their own packaging at much more expensive prices than, in fact, often those suppliers could actually achieve the packaging themselves. So, in fact, the supermarkets are very much involved in actually driving, both the cost and the extent of packaging up.
Absolutely, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I'm sure, and I hope we will hear more from him on this point later. There was a very interesting study done by the Local Government Association last year, which found that the market had the minimal packaging and the supermarkets had the most. Just turning finally to the issue of plastic bags. I'm intrigued in the sudden interest in this issue from the Prime Minister and the Government, which I suspect may partly be driven by the media agenda and a certain Daily Mail campaign. While it is important to cut the number of disposable bags used, it is, in the context of a much wider packaging debate, literally a drop in the ocean. It really is perhaps something that is visible, but is not, in terms of the overall issue, the most important. The Minister knows the evidence on taxes is mixed about whether it actually does reduce greenhouse gas emissions and indeed whether there are negative effects of increasing other bag use. I do welcome the distinction that the charge that's being considered would be whatever the bag is made from, because I think that is important, because otherwise heavier bags could be used, leading to more greenhouse gas emissions. But I still think that a voluntary approach is best. To conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker, consumers are paying through the nose for excessive packaging at the checkout in their council tax bills and...
Order, I'm afraid that is the conclusion.